Let's add some transitions to my timeline using the UXP API. And there, I just added 3 dip to black transitions between all the clips on my active sequence. Let's take a look. And yep, there they are. Welcome back to Programming for Adobe. My name is Tommy, and today I'm going to show you guys exactly how video transitions work in the new UXP Premiere Pro API. So here I've got the code for the plugin that I just showed you guys. The first thing we want to do in any UXP script is grab a reference to the ppro object. This is only available in the UXP runtime, and this is how you can grab a reference to it. Once you have a reference to the ppro object, it has a property called P project. We can take a look at here. I download the Adobe TypeScript definitions, which are very, very helpful. As we can see here, the project property exists on the ppro object. Within the project property, we have this getActiveProject method. This is going to return to us a promise containing the current project. What we want to do is first grab the project, make sure it exists. Then on the active project, we are going to grab the active sequence. We're going to make sure that the active sequence exists. And then finally, we're going to make sure that the video track count is greater than 0. If we don't have any video tracks, there's nothing we can do to add transitions. And I know this is pretty annoying to have to do all this error checking, but the API is still a little finicky, and the user can get their Premiere Pro into a weird state, and your plugin might not work as expected. So it's very important that you have explicit error handling and assume that something is going to go wrong. Once we've confirmed that the user has an active project with an active sequence and a video track, we can actually get to work. We're going to loop through all of the video tracks, and we're going to grab a reference to the video track. If for some reason the track doesn't exist, which can happen, again, this is a very beta API at the moment and things can get weird, we're going to have to just continue. We don't want to throw an error. We're just going to continue and go on to the next video track. And now, assuming we have a video track, the thing we're going to want to do is grab the items. Let's go back over to Premiere Pro. The video tracks would be up here. So we see that I have V1, V2, et cetera, and the track items are going to be each of these clips. In the case of the current project, get track items here is going to return an array with 4 items, each item corresponding to one of the clips in my timeline. And then here is where the logic is to add the transition. And it is a little more complicated than I would like. Let's ignore this execute transaction block for now. Let's take a look at create add video transition action. So the current item, which would be the track item. So when you have a reference to this video clip track item, one of the methods on that is going to be create add video transition action, which is quite a mouthful. This method is going to return an action that will then create a video transition. I'll explain what an action is in a second, but for now, let's look at the arguments to this function. First, we need to create a video transition. And I know this is confusing, but create video transition is going to return to us a video transition object. And even more confusingly, this video transition object doesn't have any defined properties. It's some kind of stub object that they have only in the UXP runtime. It's very odd. And we cannot just create the transition by passing a string. We have to call this create video transition method on the transition factory object. And you might be wondering, where did I get the arguments to this function? We can see here just by inspection, just by looking with your own eyes, that this is probably going to correspond to dip to black. But where did I find that? If we take a look at the transition factory static, we'll notice that the match name is of type video transition match name. And we'll also notice that there's this other method called get video transition match names. Now, I don't know why they didn't just include an enum, but you need to provide an explicit string value that corresponds to a video transition match name. And where you find these valid strings is from the get video transition match names method. So really what you'd want to do is you would first want to do something like this. This function is going to return to you an array that contains all of the valid match names. And then you would have to grab one of those specifically. But that makes it really hard to just pass in the dip to black. We already know we're going to do dip to black. So what I ended up doing was modifying these types. I should also point out that while I did download the types from the official Adobe documentation, I've had to go in and make some modifications. In particular, when I downloaded these types originally, this match name was just a string. And there was no documentation whatsoever on where to find the valid strings. I was playing around with the dev tools, banging my head against the wall, and I was somehow able to figure out that if you call get video transition match names, it would return to you a list of strings that could be used. And then what I did is I created the object and I added strong typing. So if we go over here, I created this object here that's basically just a dictionary with all of the valid transition match names. There really isn't more documentation on what these strings mean, but luckily most of them are pretty self-explanatory. So we can find here dip to black. Where is it? Dip to black. Yeah, dip to black, we see it down there. So anyway, that's where I got that string name. Just keep in mind that you will need a valid string name. And when I tried to do this without a valid string name, it failed silently. It just didn't apply any transitions, but it wasn't throwing an error. So this is a very unfortunate function. It's a very unfortunate thing to work with, but that's how it is right now as of April 2025. Okay, so once we grab the transition, we've told Adobe we're gonna be using the dip to black. Now we need to give it the options. And the transition options is a type here. And this type is just some type here. And if we look here, it's got some properties like apply to start, for single-sided, we can control the duration. And we've also got some methods here that we can use to set the various values. Now, you might be tempted to just inline this object. So you might be tempted to just put this object inline and then implement the functions or whatever yourself. Don't do that. That doesn't work. Believe me, I already tried. You need to call the add transition options method on the ppro base object. And this is going to return the default add transition options object. And if you want to change any of the default values, you have to call the setters here. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm calling set duration and changing the time to 1 second. And of course, it's not just an integer. You have to use this tick time object, which we'll talk about in a separate video. But anyway, that's what you need to do to create the add transition option object. Then you can pass it in. And like I mentioned, this method, add video transition action, is not going to return to you something that, it's not going to just return to you a Boolean that says it succeeded or not. It's going to return to you this capital A action. And this capital A action is sort of this asynchronous work unit. And in order to get UXP to execute this asynchronous work unit, you need to call this execute transaction object and add the action to the existing list of actions. I know it's very confusing. I really hope they make this easier to use in the future, but this is what you need to do to add a transition. Then once you finally are done with that, you will see the new transition on the timeline. So to recap, you need to make sure that the user has a valid project with a valid sequence and actually has tracks. You need to go through the video track and loop through and find all the individual video clips. Then you need to create the video transition. And in order to do that, you need to call this create video transition method on the transition factory. And then you also need to pass a valid transition options object. And I will remind you guys that this is a required argument. You cannot just omit that argument. So in order to get the transition options object, you need to call the add transition options method on the base ppro object. And I think to make matters worse, at least the last time I checked the official Adobe Docs, the add transition options method was not present in the documentation for the ppro object. Again, I found this in the Chrome DevTools, and I'm sharing with you guys because it was really frustrating and I don't want you guys to have to deal with this. Anyway, that's how you add a video transition using the UXP API in Premiere Pro. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know if there's a topic you want me to cover in the future. Until next time.